Before we start the video, hit the subscribe button. Enter the world where classified intelligence reveals truths that shatter every assumption about what shares our planet. I'm a thermal imagery analyst for military intelligence, and what I discovered in satellite data from 3 different nations should be impossible. But the protocols, the coordinated silence, and the 11 rules that every military force follows tell me one thing: they all know, and they're all terrified. My name is Captain Sarah Chin. Well, that's not my real name, but the clearance level I held was real enough. For 6 years, I worked in the Joint Thermal Analysis Center, a facility that officially doesn't exist, buried 3 levels beneath Fort Meade. My job was simple: analyze thermal satellite imagery from global hotspots, identify heat signatures that indicated enemy movement, installations, or weapon systems. The work was tedious most days. Endless loops of infrared footage showing convoys, encampments, the heat bloom of cooking fires. You learn to recognize patterns. Human signatures register between 96 and 99 degrees Fahrenheit. Vehicles show characteristic heat distributions. Fires have distinct thermal profiles. What I found in the tunnel networks didn't match any known pattern. It started 3 months ago during routine analysis of footage from the Afghanistan-Pakistan border region. I was reviewing overnight thermal scans of known insurgent supply routes when something caught my eye. Grid reference 34.2891 degrees north, 69.1573 degrees east. The Tora Bora cave systems. Every analyst knows about Tora Bora. Massive underground tunnel networks carved during the Soviet occupation, expanded over decades. Intelligence estimates suggested over 200 miles of interconnected passages, some reaching depths of 1,000 feet or more. Both coalition forces and local militants used portions of the system, but certain sections remained off-limits to everyone. I'd always assumed it was due to collapse risk or unexploded ordnance. The thermal signature appeared at 03:27 local time during the new moon. The imagery showed a heat source emerging from tunnel entrance Delta 7, one of the restricted zones marked with red flags in our database. The signature was massive, easily 15 feet tall, with a core temperature reading of 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Surface temperature suggested skin, not clothing or equipment. I ran diagnostics on my equipment. Calibration was perfect. I checked for anomalies, satellite glitches, atmospheric interference, nothing. The signature moved with purpose, traversing 400 meters of open terrain before descending into a different tunnel entrance. Its gait pattern was humanoid: 2 legs, upright posture, arms swinging in natural rhythm. But the proportions were wrong. The stride length suggested legs nearly 9 feet long. The shoulder width was impossibly broad, at least 5 feet across. I flagged it for my supervisor, Major David Kowalski, 20-year intelligence veteran, 3 combat tours, the kind of analyst who'd seen everything from drug tunnels to nuclear facilities. He took one look at the footage and closed my workstation screen. Conference room, now. And Chin, bring nothing with you. The conference room was a SCIF, a sensitive, compartmented information facility with electromagnetic shielding and soundproofing. Major Kowalski entered behind me and locked the door with his biometric key. He didn't sit down. "What you saw," he began, his voice carefully controlled, "has a classification level above top secret. It's categorized under Umbra Deep protocols. Do you understand what that means?" I didn't. Umbra Deep wasn't in any classification guide I'd studied. "It means," he continued, "that what you've discovered is known to approximately 40 people worldwide. It means that unauthorized disclosure carries consequences beyond court-martial. And it means that from this moment forward, Your entire career trajectory has changed." He pulled up a chair and sat down heavily, suddenly looking older than his 47 years. "How much of the Tora Bora footage did you review?" "Just the one instance, sir. Grid reference 34.2891 by I know the coordinates." He rubbed his eyes. "Did you check historical data from that location?" "No, sir. Should I have?" He produced a tablet from his jacket, already displaying thermal imagery. "This is from 6 months ago. Same location, same lunar phase." He swiped through multiple images. 18 months ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago. Each image showed the same impossible heat signature. 15-foot humanoid forms emerging from the restricted tunnel sections during new moon periods. Sometimes single entities, sometimes 3 or 4 together. "Now," Major Kowalski said quietly, "let me show you something that will really disturb you." He pulled up satellite footage from a completely different location. Northern Pakistan near the Khyber Pass. Different tunnel system, different terrain, same restricted access zones. The thermal signatures were identical. He showed me footage from Syria, from Yemen, from the Caucasus Mountains, from North Korea's tunnel networks along the DMZ. Every image showed the same pattern: massive humanoid heat signatures emerging from restricted underground sections during new moon periods.
"Sir," I whispered, my mouth suddenly dry, "how long has this been going on?" Major Kowalski met my eyes. "As far as we can determine, since humans first started digging tunnels. The difference is, we only developed thermal imaging technology in the 1950s. Before that, we just had the rules." "Rules, sir?" He nodded slowly. 11 protocols that every military force follows, regardless of political alignment. NATO forces follow them. Russian military follows them. Chinese PLA follows them. Iranian Revolutionary Guard follows them. Protocols about tunnel depth, new moon operations, what to do if you encounter certain signs. My hands were shaking. "What are they?" "We call them the Burrow Giants," he said. "And Captain Chen, you're about to learn why 3 generations of military intelligence analysts have kept this secret, and why you'll keep it too. Because the alternative, what happens when someone breaks the protocols, is something no nation on Earth wants to risk." He stood up and walked to the door, then paused. "Tomorrow, you begin specialized training. Tonight, go home. Get some sleep if you can. And Chen, whatever you do, don't start looking at new moon footage from other tunnel systems. Not yet. What you'd find would keep you awake for weeks." But I couldn't help myself. That night, alone in my apartment, I began searching through historical archives. And what I discovered in the thermal data, the patterns stretching back decades, the coordinated silence between enemy nations, made me realize something terrifying. The Burrow Giants weren't just real. They were everywhere, living beneath our feet in networks that connected across continents. And every military force on Earth had learned the same hard lesson about what happens when you disturb them. The training was about to teach me exactly what that lesson was, and why the 11 protocols existed in the first place. The specialized training began at 0600 the next morning, in a facility I'd never known existed, 3 miles beneath the main installation. The elevator ride down took 9 minutes. My ears popped 4 times from the pressure changes. Major Kowalski waited for me in a bunker that looked like it belonged to a different era. Concrete walls 2 feet thick, radiation shielding, air filtration systems that hummed with Cold War paranoia. A conference table held file boxes marked with classifications I'd never seen before.
"What you're about to learn," he began without preamble, "is taught to exactly one analyst per installation worldwide. You're now the primary burrow giant specialist for North American operations. If something happens to me, this knowledge stays alive through you." He opened the first file box. Inside were photographs, thermal images, and handwritten reports dating back to the 1960s. The first confirmed thermal contact was in 1967. Soviet satellite technology, primitive by today's standards, but effective enough. A research team analyzing underground nuclear test sites in Kazakhstan noticed anomalous heat signatures in natural cave systems adjacent to their facilities. The photographs showed grainy thermal images, but the shapes were unmistakable. Large humanoid forms, their heat signatures blazing white against the cooler background. The Soviets did what the Soviets always did. They sent in a team to investigate. Spetsnaz unit, 12 men, full combat gear. They entered the cave system during a new moon period. He pulled out a report in Russian with an English translation clipped to it. 3 men came back. 2 died within 72 hours from injuries that military physicians couldn't explain. The 3rd survived, but never spoke again. He spent the rest of his life in a psychiatric facility, drawing the same image over and over. The drawing showed a figure, humanoid but massive, with proportions that hurt to look at too long. Arms that reached past its knees, a head that seemed too small for the body, hands with too many fingers. My stomach tightened. What happened to the rest of the team? They were never recovered. The Soviets sealed that section of the cave system with concrete and established the first protocol. No entry into deep tunnel networks during new moon periods. He opened another file. The Americans had their encounter 3 years later, Vietnam, 1970. Tunnel rats clearing Viet Cong supply routes discovered a section that went much deeper than the typical tunnel systems. Against orders, a 4-man team descended to investigate. The after-action report was heavily redacted, but certain phrases stood out. Encountered large, hostile, extreme physical trauma, recommend immediate withdrawal and permanent closure. Only 1 man made it out, Sergeant Thomas Mitchell. He testified that they had descended perhaps 400 feet when they encountered something he described as too big to be down there, something that moved with intelligence and purpose, something that pursued them through the tunnels with terrifying speed. He showed me Mitchell's testimony transcript. The sergeant had described hearing breathing, deep and slow, echoing through the tunnel system, feeling vibrations through the ground as something massive approached, seeing for just a moment in his flashlight beam a hand reaching around a corner, a hand large enough to palm his entire head. Mitchell died of a heart attack 6 months later. He was 23 years old with no history of cardiac issues. The military physician noted extreme stress markers in his system, consistent with sustained terror response. Kowalski pulled out a world map covered with red pins.
Over the next 50 years, every nation with significant tunnel infrastructure had similar encounters. The British in Gibraltar, the French in their Maginot Line bunkers, the Chinese along their underground military networks, the North Koreans in their massive tunnel systems beneath the DMZ. Each pin represented an incident. There were hundreds. What we learned, collectively, and often through tragic loss of life, was compiled into what we now call the 11 Protocols. These aren't suggestions or guidelines. They're rules written in the blood of soldiers who discovered what happens when you break them. He handed me a laminated card. The text was simple, direct, and terrifying in its implications.
The 11 protocols for deep tunnel operations. No tunnel operations during new moon periods, 3 days before through 3 days after new moon. No descent beyond 500 feet without acoustic monitoring equipment. Immediate withdrawal upon detection of the following: ground vibrations, unexplained heat signatures above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, breathing sounds inconsistent with team members, or discovery of bone deposits. No investigation of tunnel branches that descend at angles greater than 45 degrees. Maintain constant radio contact with surface operations. Loss of contact requires immediate abort. No use of explosives in deep sections without seismic analysis. Mark all entry points with thermal beacons. They avoid marked entrances. Minimum team size 4 personnel. Solo operations result in 100% casualty rate. Emergency egress plan required before descent. They can move faster than humans can climb. If you hear vocalization that sounds human but isn't, withdraw immediately. Mimicry indicates hunting behavior. These protocols, Kowalski said, are followed by every military force on Earth: NATO, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, everyone. There's no international treaty, no formal agreement, but every nation that operates underground has learned the same lessons, paid the same price in blood, and arrived at the same conclusions. How is that possible? I asked. Enemy nations cooperating without acknowledgement? Because the alternative is unacceptable. Early attempts to weaponize the burrow giants, to use them against enemy forces, resulted in catastrophic failures. The entities don't distinguish between human factions. They respond to intrusion, not allegiance. He pulled out another file, this one marked with multiple security classifications. In 1983, a Soviet general had the brilliant idea of driving Afghan resistance fighters into a tunnel system inhabited by the entities. 300 mujahideen entered. None of them came out. But neither did the Spetsnaz unit that was supposed to seal the entrance afterward. The tunnel system had to be collapsed with air-dropped ordnance, killing another 27 Soviet soldiers in the process. The entities emerged anyway. They dug their way out through half a mile of collapsed rock in less than 48 hours. They killed 17 more Soviet soldiers before retreating back underground. After that incident, the USSR added their findings to the protocols. Every nation does. I stared at the map, at the hundreds of red pins marking encounter sites. Sir, why don't we just avoid these areas entirely, seal them permanently? We've tried. Concrete doesn't stop them. They dig around it. Steel barriers get bent like paper. The only thing that works is the protocols. Stay out during new moons. Don't go too deep. Respect the boundaries. When we follow the rules, they stay below. When we break them, people die. He stood up and walked to a large monitor mounted on the wall. Now I'm going to show you something that will help you understand the scope of what we're dealing with. This is real-time thermal monitoring of deep tunnel systems worldwide. The screen lit up with a global map. Thousands of small red dots marked tunnel entrance points. As I watched, some of the dots began pulsing. Those pulses indicate thermal activity at depth, burrow giants moving through the systems. Watch the pattern. The pulses seemed random at first, but as I watched, I began to see the connections. A pulse in Afghanistan, then minutes later, a pulse in Pakistan, then Iran, then Syria. They're connected. I whispered. "The tunnel systems are all connected." "Not just connected," Kowalski replied. "Integrated. We estimate there are between 50,000 and 100,000 miles of deep tunnels worldwide that we didn't build. Natural cave systems, yes, but modified, expanded, and interconnected by something with intelligence and purpose. The burrow giants have been engineering underground infrastructure for longer than human civilization has existed." He zoomed in on the Mediterranean region. During World War II, both Allied and Axis forces encountered them. There are classified reports from North Africa, from Italy, from the Balkans. Both sides implemented their own versions of the protocols without realizing the enemy was doing the same thing. The Germans called them Höhlengiganten. The British called them deep dwellers. Why didn't anyone talk about it after the war? Who would believe it? And more importantly, revealing what we'd encountered would require explaining how we knew the enemy was encountering the same thing. That would expose intelligence sources, satellite capabilities, shared experiences that neither side wanted to acknowledge.
He pulled up thermal footage from the Korean DMZ, one of the most heavily monitored borders on Earth. North Korea has perhaps the most extensive tunnel network built by human hands. Over 20 confirmed tunnels under the DMZ, with hundreds more throughout the country. They follow the protocols religiously. So do South Korean forces. So do the Americans stationed there, because everyone who's operated in those tunnels knows what lives in the deeper sections. The footage showed massive heat signatures moving through tunnels far below the man-made infrastructure. In 1976, a North Korean tunnel team accidentally broke through into a natural cave system at 700 feet. They encountered 3 burrow giants. 14 North Korean soldiers died. The tunnel was sealed, and North Korea shared the coordinates with South Korean forces through back channels. That section remains restricted to this day by both sides. I felt dizzy. The implications were overwhelming. How do they survive down there? What do they eat? We don't know. Thermal imaging shows they have elevated body temperatures, suggesting high metabolic rates, but we've never found evidence of what sustains them. The bone deposits in some tunnels suggest they're carnivorous, but the bones are always old, decades or even centuries old. Current feeding behavior is unknown. He showed me more footage, this time from the Himalayas. Chinese military encountered them during tunnel construction through the mountains in the 1990s. 6 workers disappeared. When the rescue team descended, they found evidence of extreme violence. The Chinese implemented the protocols and shared their findings with Indian military despite being adversaries. Both nations now maintain buffer zones around certain mountain caves. "This is insane," I said, my voice barely steady. "We're talking about a global conspiracy of silence, about an unknown species living beneath our feet." "Not a conspiracy," Kowalski corrected. "A necessity. Look at this." He pulled up casualty statistics. Pre-protocol era, between 1960 and 1985, we estimate 3,000 to 5,000 military personnel worldwide were killed or disappeared in tunnel-related incidents. Post-protocol era, from 1985 to present, fewer than 200. The protocols work. Silence works. Respecting the boundaries works. What happens if the public finds out? Then you'd have amateur explorers, thrill seekers, and conspiracy theorists flooding into restricted tunnel systems during new moon periods.
You'd have casualties on a scale that no government could contain or explain. You'd have panic, demands for military action against an enemy we can't effectively fight in their territory. The protocols would break down, and the entities would respond. He turned off the monitor. The greatest military secret in human history isn't a weapon or a surveillance system. It's the knowledge that we share this planet with something ancient, something powerful, and something that we've learned to coexist with through fear and respect. Break that coexistence, and we face an enemy in every tunnel system on Earth simultaneously. An enemy that knows those systems better than we ever will. I looked at the laminated protocol card in my hands. So what's my job, sir? Just monitor and report? Your job, he said heavily, is to watch for pattern changes. The entities have been consistent for decades, but if that changes, if they start moving into shallower tunnels or appearing during periods outside the new moon, we need to know immediately, because any change in their behavior could indicate something worse is coming. Worse than giant predators living in tunnel systems worldwide? Major Kowalski's expression darkened. Captain Chen, the protocols exist because the entities established boundaries. They stay deep. They avoid marked entrances. They only surface during new moons. But what if those aren't limitations? What if they're choices? What if the burrow giants are staying below because something else exists even deeper that makes the surface world a preferable place to be? The temperature in the bunker suddenly felt much colder. Tomorrow, I'll show you the Damascus Protocol, the contingency plan for what to do if the entities ever break their patterns. For now, start reviewing the global thermal network, look for anomalies, and pray you don't find any. But I already had. While he'd been talking, I'd been thinking about something I'd seen in the historical data, a pattern I'd noticed but hadn't yet mentioned. The burrow giants weren't just moving through tunnels randomly. They were gathering, and they were gathering beneath populated areas. I spent the next 72 hours reviewing decades of thermal satellite data. Major Kowalski had given me access to archives from 12 different intelligence agencies, all sharing information they'd never officially acknowledged collecting. Russian thermal data from the 1980s, Chinese satellite footage from the 2000s, European intelligence from restricted military sites. The pattern emerged slowly, but once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. The burrow giants weren't just moving through tunnels randomly. They were positioning themselves beneath specific types of locations: major cities, military installations, infrastructure nodes, places where human populations concentrated. I created a map overlay matching thermal signature locations with surface population density. The correlation was disturbing. Every major metropolitan area with deep tunnel access, natural cave systems, or abandoned mines showed thermal signatures at depth during new moon periods.
New York City, London, Moscow, Beijing, Tokyo, Seoul. Every major population center had them beneath, sometimes dozens of signatures in a single network. I printed out the analysis and brought it to Major Kowalski's office at 0300. He was already there, as I'd suspected he would be. Intelligence analysts keep strange hours. "Sir, I found something." He looked at my printouts, and his expression didn't change, which told me everything. "You already knew," I said. "Sit down, Captain."
I sat. He poured 2 cups of coffee from a pot that looked like it had been brewing since yesterday. "What you've discovered," he began, "is what we call the garrison pattern. It was first identified in 1992 by a French intelligence analyst named Marcel Fournier. He disappeared 3 weeks after submitting his findings."
Disappeared?
Car accident, officially. Single vehicle collision on a rural road. No witnesses. But Fournier had shared his analysis with colleagues before his death. His work survived him. Kowalski pulled up a classified document on his terminal. French intelligence markings, translated into English. Fournier theorized that the burrow giants weren't randomly distributed through tunnel systems. He spent 2 years analyzing thermal data from European cave networks and noticed they concentrated beneath cities, not near cities, directly beneath them. The document showed thermal overlays of Paris, Rome, and Berlin. Each city had multiple heat signatures in deep tunnel systems directly below populated districts. At first, we thought it was coincidental. Cities are often built near water sources, and water creates cave systems. But Fournier tested that hypothesis. He looked at cities without natural cave systems, cities built on solid bedrock. Kowalski showed me thermal data from New York City. Manhattan sits on bedrock. No natural caves. But in the 1990s, thermal imaging detected massive heat signatures 800 feet below the subway system. Not in any tunnel we built, in spaces that shouldn't exist. How is that possible? Because they didn't use our tunnels, Captain. They dug their own. Over centuries, possibly millennia, they've excavated networks beneath population centers worldwide. The question Fournier asked was, why? He pulled up more data. Tokyo, showing signatures beneath the city's deepest subway lines. Moscow, with thermal readings from beneath the metro system. Beijing, with signatures deeper than any known construction. Fournier proposed 3 theories. 1. Strategic positioning. They're beneath us as a defensive measure, ready to respond if we ever threaten them directly. The thought made my hands cold around the coffee cup. 2. Resource gathering. Cities produce waste, heat, vibration. Maybe they're feeding off byproducts of human civilization we don't even recognize as valuable. And 3. Kowalski's expression darkened. 3. They're waiting. Positioned beneath our most populated areas, our military installations, our infrastructure nodes, waiting for something we don't understand yet. He pulled up a timeline of thermal signature appearances. The garrison pattern strengthened after World War II. Before 1945, we have limited data, but what exists suggests the entities were more dispersed. After 1945, they began concentrating beneath cities. The process took decades, but by the 1990s, the pattern was undeniable. What happened in 1945 that would change their behavior? We detonated nuclear weapons, the first atomic bombs in human history, and within months, thermal monitoring began detecting increased movement in deep tunnel systems worldwide, as if something that had been dormant suddenly woke up. He pulled up seismic data from the 1940s and 50s. We didn't have thermal satellites yet, but we had seismographs. After Hiroshima and Nagasaki, seismic stations worldwide detected unusual ground vibrations, not earthquakes, something else. Movement at extreme depths radiating from Asia outward. The seismic maps showed vibration patterns spreading like ripples through underground networks, from Japan to China to Russia to Europe to North America, as if something had stirred in the deep places and begun migrating. Every major tunnel encounter after 1945 reported more aggressive behavior from the entities. The Garrison incident in 1967, the Vietnam encounters in 1970, the British Gibraltar incident in 1972. They weren't just defending territory anymore. They were actively positioning themselves. I thought about the implications, about massive beings moving through Earth itself, relocating to strategic positions beneath human cities. Sir, if they've been positioning themselves since the 1940s, what are they positioning for? That's the question that keeps me awake at night, Captain. And it's the question that got Marcel Fournier killed, even though his death was made to look accidental. Who killed him? Our own government? Kowalski shook his head slowly. That's the thing about the Garrison pattern. Once you start mapping it, once you start seeing the scope of what's beneath us, you can't stop asking questions. Fournier didn't just analyze thermal data. He started researching historical records, archaeological sites, ancient texts that mentioned beings beneath the earth. He pulled up scanned pages from old manuscripts, translations from Latin, Arabic, Sanskrit. Every ancient civilization had stories about them. The Greeks called them gigantes, living in the earth after being cast down. Mesopotamian texts describe Anunnaki dwelling in the Abzu, the underground realm. Hindu texts mention Nagas in Patala, the underworld. Different names, different cultures, but consistent descriptions. Massive humanoid beings living in deep places, occasionally emerging to interact with surface dwellers. You're saying they've always been there, since before recorded history? I'm saying they were there before us, Captain. We didn't discover deep tunnel systems. We discovered that someone else had already built them. The bunker suddenly felt much smaller, the 3 miles of earth above us pressing down with suffocating weight. Fournier's last report, submitted the day before his death, contained a disturbing observation. The burrow giants weren't just beneath cities, they were beneath specific types of cities. Population centers with certain characteristics.
Kowalski highlighted cities on the global map, each one marked with concentrated thermal signatures. What do these cities have in common? They're all built on or near major fault lines, seismic activity zones, places where the Earth's crust is thinner, more unstable. Tokyo sits on the Ring of Fire, San Francisco on the San Andreas Fault, Istanbul on the North Anatolian Fault, Tehran on multiple fault lines. My stomach dropped as I saw the pattern. They're positioning themselves where they can affect seismic activity, where they could potentially trigger earthquakes. That was Fournier's conclusion, and 3 weeks later, he was dead. His research was classified beyond top secret and distributed only to the 40 people worldwide who manage burrow giant intelligence. You're now one of them. He stood and walked to the wall map, placing his hand on the Mediterranean region. The Damascus Protocol, our contingency plan, was developed in response to Fournier's findings. It assumes the worst-case scenario, that the Garrison pattern represents a strategic threat, that the entities are capable of coordinated action, and that they've positioned themselves to potentially devastate human civilization if they choose to. How would we even fight something like that? We wouldn't, not successfully. The Damascus Protocol isn't about fighting them. It's about preventing the scenario where fighting becomes necessary.
It's about maintaining the protocols, respecting the boundaries, and praying they never decide to use the strategic positions they've spent 80 years establishing. He returned to his desk and opened a locked drawer marked with classifications I'd never seen before. This is your copy of the Damascus Protocol. You're required to memorize it within 72 hours and return the physical document for destruction. If the protocol is ever activated, you'll know what to do. I took the folder with hands that weren't quite steady. Sir, what would activate it? What would make them break the pattern? Only two scenarios. One, we break the protocols on a massive scale, intrude into their territory in ways they can't ignore. Two, something changes at depths even greater than where they live, something that makes them move toward the surface. He pulled up one final thermal image, this one dated from just 3 days ago. Deep beneath the Himalayas, at depths our equipment could barely penetrate, something enormous was moving. Not a burrow giant, something larger, something that made the 15-foot entities look small by comparison. We detected this 72 hours ago. It's moving slowly, but it's moving upward, from depths we can't measure toward the levels where the burrow giants typically operate. And Captain, here's what terrifies me most. He zoomed out, showing thermal data from multiple continents. It's not alone. We're detecting similar massive signatures rising from extreme depths in at least 37 locations worldwide. Whatever lives even deeper than the burrow giants, it's starting to move, and the burrow giants are responding. The thermal overlays showed the 15-foot signatures abandoning their garrison positions, moving deeper into the tunnel systems, gathering, preparing. If the burrow giants are afraid of something, then we should be terrified. Because they're repositioning again, not beneath cities this time. They're concentrating in defensive formations in the deepest accessible tunnels, as if they're preparing to stop something from reaching the surface. What could be down there that scares them? I don't know, Captain, but I know this. For 80 years, the burrow giants have been our nightmare. The things that every military force feared, the entities that forced unprecedented international cooperation just to coexist with them. And now they're acting like prey. He closed the thermal monitoring systems and turned to face me fully. Your primary mission, effective immediately, is to monitor these deep signatures, track their movement, analyze their patterns, and report any changes directly to me. Secondary mission, begin reviewing historical seismic data for correlations with thermal anomalies. If something is rising from depths we didn't know existed, I want to know if it's happened before. And if it has happened before? Major Kowalski walked to the door of the bunker, his hand on the biometric lock. Then we need to understand what our ancestors did to survive it. Because the protocols we follow now, the rules written in blood by 3 generations of military personnel, only account for the burrow giants. If something worse exists below them, we're going to need new rules. And Captain, we're going to need them fast. The bunker door opened with a hiss of pressurized air. Get some rest. Tomorrow, you start monitoring the deep signatures full time. And Chen, whatever you find in those thermal readings, whatever patterns emerge, remember this: the burrow giants have lived beneath our feet for millennia. They know things about what's under the earth that we can't imagine. If they're afraid, we should be too.
I left the bunker carrying the Damascus Protocol folder and the weight of knowledge that made my 3 months of analysis feel like child's play. The thermal signatures I'd discovered weren't the threat, they were the warning. Something was rising from the deep places of the earth, something that made the burrow giants retreat, and I had 72 hours to memorize the contingency plan for a threat we didn't understand, couldn't fight, and might not survive. The elevator ride back to the surface took 9 minutes. By the time I reached ground level, I'd already decided to start with the seismic data from the 1940s. If the burrow giants' behavior changed after nuclear weapons, maybe that wasn't coincidence. Maybe we'd done more than wake them up. Maybe we'd cracked something open, something deeper, something worse. And maybe the garrison pattern wasn't a threat at all. Maybe it was the only thing standing between humanity and whatever had started moving in the darkness below. The call came at 04:17 on a Tuesday morning. I'd been asleep for maybe 3 hours after spending the previous day analyzing seismic data from the 1940s. My secure phone buzzed with the priority alert tone I'd only heard during drills. "Chen, get to the operations center now." Major Kowalski's voice was tight with controlled tension. "We have a Protocol 7 violation in progress." I was dressed and moving before he finished the sentence. Protocol 7. No use of explosives in deep sections without seismic analysis. Someone had detonated something underground, somewhere they absolutely shouldn't have. The operations center was chaos when I arrived. Every screen showed thermal data, seismic readings, and satellite imagery. Analysts from different agencies crowded around workstations, their voices a controlled storm of technical jargon and barely suppressed panic. "Situation," Kowalski barked as I entered. Lieutenant Morrison, our seismic specialist, pulled up real-time data on the main display. At 0347 local time, we detected multiple high-yield detonations in the Zagros Mountains, western Iran. Grid reference 33.8547 degrees north, 46.2467 degrees east. Depth approximately 900 feet. The explosions occurred in a restricted tunnel system marked under international protocol since 1978. My blood went cold. The Zagros region had some of the highest burrow giant activity in the Middle East. Every military force knew to avoid those specific coordinates. Who authorized the operation? No one did, Kowalski said grimly. It's a rogue action. Initial intelligence suggests a private military contractor hired by parties unknown, conducting unauthorized geological survey work. They were drilling for potential oil reserves and broke into a natural cave system. They didn't know about the protocols? The company is legitimate. The geologists are civilian. Someone hired them without disclosing what was actually beneath that mountain. When they broke through, they encountered something. They panicked and used their mining explosives to try to collapse the tunnel section. Morrison pulled up thermal imaging from before the explosions. Multiple 15-foot signatures had been present in the system, following their normal patterns. The thermal overlay showed them in the deepest sections, well below the drilling operation. The explosions weren't just surface charges, Morrison continued. They used shaped charges designed to fracture rock at depth. The seismic readings indicate they collapsed at least 400 meters of tunnel structure. Casualties? The drilling team was 12 personnel. We've lost contact with all of them. Iranian Revolutionary Guard has units en route,
but they're maintaining a 2-kilometer perimeter. They know the protocols. Kowalski's jaw tightened. Show her the thermal data after the explosion. Morrison switched to post-detonation imagery. My stomach dropped. The thermal signatures had changed. Instead of the normal, slow, methodical movement patterns we'd observed for decades, they were moving fast, extremely fast, and they weren't retreating deeper. They were ascending. "How many signatures?" I asked, though I could count them myself on the screen. "We're tracking 17 distinct entities, all moving toward the surface, but here's what's worse." Morrison zoomed out to show the broader region. Throughout the Zagros tunnel network, dozens more signatures were converging on the breach site, not just from nearby tunnels, from systems hundreds of miles away. "They're responding," I whispered. "It's coordinated." "It's more than coordinated," Kowalski said. "Watch this." He played back the thermal footage at high speed. The signatures moved through the tunnel network with impossible efficiency, taking routes that shouldn't have existed, appearing to pass through solid rock barriers that our mapping showed as impenetrable. They're using connections we never detected, tunnels we didn't know were there. Captain Chen, they have infrastructure we can't map and mobility we can't match. An alert sounded from one of the workstations. A young analyst called out, "Sir, Iranian military reports surface emergence. 2 contacts, approximately 5 clicks from the drill site." The satellite feed switched to visual spectrum. Even from orbit, the shapes were visible. 2 massive figures standing in an open area of the mountain range, visible against the snow. At 15 feet tall, they were unmistakable even from satellite altitude. "They've never done this before," Morrison said, his voice shaking. "In 70 years of monitoring, they've never emerged in daylight, never stood in the open, never made themselves this visible." "They're sending a message," I said. "The protocols were broken. They're responding." Another alert. "Sir, contacts moving toward the Iranian military perimeter." "Get me CENTCOM," Kowalski ordered. "And someone get the Iranian liaison on secure channel. They need to pull their people back now."
But it was already too late. The satellite feed showed Iranian military vehicles at the 2-kilometer perimeter, exactly where they should have been according to protocol. The 2 burrowed giants covered the distance in less than 30 seconds, moving with speed that made the vehicles look stationary. "Dear God," someone whispered behind me. The figures reached the perimeter. We couldn't see details from satellite altitude, but we could see the result. Vehicles tossed aside like toys, personnel scattering. The thermal imaging showed the heat signatures of human soldiers going still, one by one. "Casualties confirmed," Morrison reported, his voice hollow. "Iranian ground forces reporting multiple KIA, estimate 15 to 20 dead in under 2 minutes. Kowalski's face had gone pale. "This is what happens when the protocols break. This is what we've spent 80 years preventing." More alerts flooded in, thermal signatures emerging at different points around the breach site. 6 now visible on the surface, 8, 12. They were forming a perimeter of their own, creating a defensive ring around the mountain region. "Sir, we're detecting movement in other tunnel systems worldwide," an analyst called out. "Signature activity has increased across all monitored networks, Europe, Asia, North America. They're all responding to the breach." I pulled up the global thermal network on my workstation. Every major tunnel system showed increased activity. Not just increased, synchronized, as if every burrow giant in every tunnel system on Earth knew what had happened in Iran and was responding simultaneously. "How are they communicating? They're thousands of miles apart." "We don't know," Kowalski replied. "Seismic vibrations, maybe. Low-frequency sound through the rock itself.
or something we can't detect, but they're definitely coordinating. The Iranian military had established a new perimeter at 5 kilometers. Smart, following protocol. But the thermal imaging showed the burrow giants weren't pursuing. They had established their own perimeter at 2 kilometers from the breach site and stopped, standing guard. They're protecting something, I realized. The collapsed tunnel section. They're making sure no one else gets close to it. Or making sure something doesn't get out, Morrison added quietly. That thought hung in the air for a long moment. The deeper signatures, the things that had been rising from extreme depths, had the explosion affected them too? Morrison's workstation erupted with alerts. Sir, I'm detecting new thermal signatures at the breach site. Different profile, larger, much larger. He pulled up the data. My hands went numb. The signature emerging from the collapsed section was massive. Not 15 feet, closer to 30. Its thermal profile was different too, hotter. The core temperature reading was 112 degrees Fahrenheit, and it was moving upward through the rubble, through hundreds of feet of collapsed rock, as if the debris didn't exist. That's impossible, someone said. Nothing can move through solid rock like that. But we were watching it happen in real time. The massive signature rising toward the surface, unstoppable, terrifying in its size and power. The burrow giants responded immediately. Their 15-foot signatures converged on the emergence point, forming a defensive line, not to attack human forces, to contain whatever was coming up from below. They're trying to stop it. The burrow giants are trying to stop the deep entity from reaching the surface. Kowalski grabbed the secure phone connecting directly to the Pentagon. This is Major David Kowalski, Umbra Deep Operations. I need to speak to General Harrison immediately. Authorization code Delta Tango 779er. Tell him it's happening. The Damascus Protocol. We need global coordination now. He covered the mouthpiece and looked at me. Chen, get every analyst in here. Pull data from all allied networks. Russian, Chinese, European. I don't care about normal protocols. We need to know if this is happening anywhere else. You think the breach triggered emergence at other locations? I think we just learned what the burrow giants have been protecting us for 80 years. And we just cracked open a door that should have stayed sealed. On the main display, the massive signature broke through to the surface. The satellite feed showed the ground itself rupturing, rock and soil exploding upward, and in the thermal imaging, we could see it clearly now. Something enormous was emerging into daylight, something that made the burrow giants look like children. And surrounding it, trying desperately to contain it, were the entities we'd feared for 3 generations. The entities that were, now, impossibly, fighting on our side. Kowalski's phone call went through. I could hear his voice, clipped and urgent, activating protocols that had been written for exactly this scenario. Protocols that assumed the worst. Protocols that required every military force on Earth to cooperate. Because the rogue drilling operation had not just violated our rules, it had violated boundaries that were far older and far more important than anything humans had established. And now something from the deep places was loose, something the burrow giants themselves had been trying to keep contained, something that made their strategic positioning, their garrison pattern, their decades of preparation suddenly make terrible, perfect sense. They weren't threatening us. They'd been protecting us all along, and we just destroyed their front line.
Within 30 minutes, the operations center had transformed into something I'd never seen before. Russian intelligence officers working alongside American analysts, Chinese military liaisons coordinating with NATO forces, Iranian Revolutionary Guard sharing real-time data with Israeli defense networks. Enemies for decades, cooperating without hesitation. because the Damascus Protocol superseded all political boundaries. General Harrison appeared on the main screen via secure video link. Behind him, I could see the Emergency Operations Center at the Pentagon, staffed with officials I recognized from news broadcasts. People who officially didn't know about the burrow giants were now managing the response to their containment failure. "Status," the general demanded. Kowalski stood before the screen. "Sir, we have confirmed emergence of a deep entity at grid reference 33.8547 degrees north, 46.2467 degrees east, Zagros Mountains, Iran. Thermal profile indicates mass approximately 4 times that of standard burrow giant signatures. Current behavior, hostile. It has breached the surface and is engaged with burrow giant defensive formations." Human casualties? 23 confirmed Iranian military KIA during initial giant response to the protocol breach. Civilian drilling team of 12 presumed KIA at the collapse site. No additional human forces have engaged. And the burrow giants, are they containing it? Morrison pulled up real-time thermal imaging. The massive 30-foot signature was surrounded by 15 smaller ones. The engagement was visible even through thermal imaging. Heat signatures merging, separating, the smaller forms attempting to drive the larger one back toward the breach point. "They're trying, sir, but they're losing ground. The deep entity is moving toward populated areas. Current trajectory suggests it's heading for Kermanshah, population 950,000. The general's expression hardened. "Recommendation: evacuate Kermanshah immediately. Establish a 50-kilometer exclusion zone. And sir, we need to authorize Phase 2 of the Damascus Protocol." I'd memorized the protocol. Phase 2 meant military engagement. Coordinated strikes from multiple nations against a target that officially didn't exist until this moment. "General Harrison," a new voice interrupted. A Chinese military official appeared in a split-screen feed. "This is General Chen Wei, People's Liberation Army. We are detecting similar emergence events at 3 locations in our territory. The explosion in Iran has triggered a cascade response. Deep entities are rising in the Himalayas, the Kunlun Mountains, and beneath the Taklamakan Desert." Another screen activated. Russian military. "General Volkov, Russian Federation. We confirm emergence in the Ural Mountains. The entity has already engaged with our burrow giant population. Current containment status, failing." More screens, more generals. British intelligence reporting emergence near Gibraltar. French forces detecting activity beneath the Alps. Japanese defense networks tracking something massive rising beneath Tokyo. "Sweet mercy," someone whispered behind me. The breach in Iran hadn't just released one entity, it had triggered them all. Every deep entity that the burrow giants had been containing, positioned beneath population centers worldwide, was responding to the collapse. As if they were all connected, as if the explosion had sent a signal through the earth itself. General Harrison's face was grim. "All commands activate Phase 2 of Damascus Protocol. Rules of engagement: aerial bombardment only. No ground forces within 10 kilometers of any entity. Target priority is containment, not elimination. If the burrow giants are engaging, provide support, but do not fire on giant signatures. Confirm receipt of orders." One by one, each national command confirmed. I was watching history being made. Every military force on Earth coordinating to fight an enemy that none of them had officially acknowledged existed until this moment. "Chen," Kowalski said quietly, pulling me aside, "I need you on deep signature tracking. If more of these things are rising, we need advance warning." I moved to my workstation and pulled up the global thermal network. What I saw made my chest tighten. The deep signatures we'd been tracking for the past week, the massive thermal readings rising from extreme depths, were all accelerating, not slowly migrating upward anymore, moving fast. Dozens of them, perhaps hundreds throughout tunnel systems worldwide.
Sir, we have a problem. The deep signatures are all ascending simultaneously. ETA to engagement depth with burrow giant populations, 12 to 18 hours. How many? I counted the thermal readings, my hands shaking as I worked. At least 70 confirmed signatures worldwide, possibly more in areas where our satellite coverage is limited. If they all emerge like the one in Iran. I didn't need to finish. The implications were clear. 70 30-foot entities emerging in populated areas worldwide, each requiring multiple burrow giants to contain, would overwhelm the defensive formations.
Morrison called out from his station. Sir, Kermanshah is under attack. Iranian forces initiated evacuation, but the deep entity is moving faster than projected. The satellite feed showed chaos in the city streets, people fleeing, vehicles abandoned. And approaching from the mountains, visible even from orbit, was something that shouldn't exist in the modern world. Something massive, moving with terrifying speed. Iranian Air Force is inbound, Morrison continued. F-14 Tomcats, armed with precision-guided munitions. ETA 3 minutes. Tell them to wait for the giants to clear, Kowalski ordered. If they hit our only containment force, we lose any chance of pushing that thing back. I watched the thermal imaging as the burrow giants tried desperately to stop the deep entity's advance. They were using tactics, coordinating their attacks, attempting to flank and drive it away from the city. But the size difference was overwhelming. A 15-foot giant against a 30-foot deep entity was like a human fighting a grizzly bear. One of the giant signatures suddenly went dark, gone. The thermal reading disappeared as if it had simply ceased to exist. We just lost one, I reported, my voice hollow. Giant signature neutralized. Another disappeared, then a third. They're dying, Morrison said. The giants can't stop it alone. The Iranian F-14s appeared on radar, streaking toward the engagement zone. I could hear the radio chatter, pilots confirming targets, weapons hot, waiting for authorization to engage. All units, this is command. General Harrison's voice carried the weight of impossible choices. You are authorized to engage the primary target. Call sign Deep 1. I say again, weapons free on Deep 1. Do not engage giant signatures. They are friendlies. Acknowledge. Friendlies. The word felt surreal. 72 hours ago, the burrow giants were the nightmare we monitored in secret. Now they were allies, dying to protect cities they'd been positioned beneath for decades. The first missile struck. The thermal bloom was massive, a flash of heat that whited out our sensors momentarily. When the image cleared, the deep entity was still moving, damaged, slower, but not stopped. Target is still mobile, the Iranian pilot reported, requesting additional strike authorization. More missiles, more thermal blooms. The giant signature scattered, clearing the strike zone, then immediately returned to harass the deep entity, preventing it from advancing while the aircraft reloaded. It's working, Morrison said. Combined arms, the giants contain, the aircraft damage. It's actually working. But I was watching the global feed, watching emergence events in Russia, China, Japan, Europe, watching burrow giant formations engage deep entities in a dozen locations simultaneously, watching thermal signatures disappear as giants died defending cities full of humans who didn't even know they were being protected. Sir, I called out, global casualty count for giants. We've lost 47 confirmed signatures in the last hour. The defensive formations are being decimated. Kowalski closed his eyes briefly. And if they fail completely? I pulled up population density maps, overlaying them with emergence locations. Conservative estimate, 15 million dead in the first 24 hours. Optimistic estimate, 50 million within a week. The operations center went silent. Every analyst, every officer,
Every liaison from every nation stared at the screens showing thermal signatures dying by the dozens, beings that had lived beneath our feet for millennia, dying to stop something worse from reaching us. All commands, General Harrison said, his voice carrying to every military force engaged worldwide. Phase 3 authorization granted. Deploy all available air assets. Naval cruise missiles authorized. I want everything we have supporting giant defensive formations. Whatever those things are, they're buying us time. We don't waste it. The Russian general appeared on screen. General Harrison, we are detecting something new. The deep entities are not acting independently. They are converging. Multiple entities in our territory are moving toward a central location in the Ural Mountains. Confirm that, the Chinese general added. Our entities are also converging. They are coordinating. My workstation erupted with alerts. I pulled up the data, my hands numb. Sir, confirmed worldwide. Deep entities are not dispersing. They are gathering. 17 confirmed locations where multiple entities are converging, and the deep signatures that haven't emerged yet, they're all moving toward these same locations. Morrison's face was pale. They're forming up, like an army staging for an offensive. Or, Kowalski said quietly, they're gathering enough strength to do something that requires multiple entities working together. On the main screen, the Kermanshah deep entity finally went down. Sustained bombing, combined with giant harassment, had worked. The massive thermal signature faded, cooled, stopped moving. The remaining burrow giants, only 8 of the original 17, immediately began moving toward the next emergence point. Kermanshah is secure, the Iranian commander reported, but the giants are already leaving. They know where the next one is coming up. Because they'd been doing this for millennia, fighting, containing, dying, an endless war in the darkness beneath our feet that we'd been completely unaware of until someone accidentally cracked open the containment.
General, I said, pulling up my analysis. The convergence points, they're all located above the deepest tunnel networks we've ever detected. Places where thermal monitoring shows the lowest temperature readings at extreme depth, as if something cold exists down there. Something that these deep entities are trying to reach or release. Kowalski looked at me. Or something they're trying to wake up. The screen showed the scope of what we faced. Giants dying by the dozens, deep entities emerging worldwide, convergence points forming, and beneath it all, in the deepest places, thermal readings showing massive voids, empty spaces too large and too organized to be natural, spaces that our monitoring equipment could barely penetrate, spaces where something else lived, something that made the deep entities look small. Something that the burrow giants had been guarding against for longer than human civilization had existed. And now, because of one unauthorized drilling operation, one breach of protocols written in blood over 80 years, the doors were opening. The containment was failing, and we were about to discover what existed in the deepest places of the earth. What existed there that required 30-foot giants to guard against. What existed there that made the burrow giants position themselves beneath every major city on Earth, ready to defend us from threats we'd never imagined. The Damascus Protocol was in full effect, but as I watched the thermal readings from the deep places, I realized with cold certainty that we'd only activated our contingency plan for the middle layer. We had no protocol for what was coming from below. The communication came through channels that shouldn't have existed. I was monitoring Convergence Point 7 in the Ural Mountains when my workstation's acoustic sensors, designed to detect seismic activity, began registering something else. Low-frequency sound waves far below the range of human hearing, pulsing through the earth in patterns that were unmistakably deliberate. "Major Kowalski?" I called out.
I'm receiving structured acoustic signals from depth. It's not random, it's repeating in sequences. He moved to my station, studying the waveform display. Source? Grid reference 56.7833 degrees N, 60.5833 degrees east, the Ural convergence point. Depth approximately 2,000 feet. Sir, the pattern is consistent with linguistic structure. Someone is trying to communicate. Morrison rushed over with translation software designed for pattern recognition. Run it through SETI protocols. If it's structured communication, the math should be universal. I fed the acoustic data through the analysis system. The computer worked for 30 seconds, then began displaying results that made my hand shake. The message was simple, repeating, urgent, stop, breach, seal, return. 4 words over and over, transmitted through rock itself in a language that transcended human speech. The burrow giants were talking to us, not with voices, with vibrations that carried meaning directly into our processing systems. "They want us to seal the breach," I whispered. "They're asking us to help them." Tuwalski grabbed the secure phone. "General Harrison, we're receiving communication from giant signatures. They're requesting assistance with containment." "How is that possible?" the general's voice came back. "We don't know, sir, but the message is clear. They need us to seal the original breach point in the Zagros Mountains, the collapsed tunnel section where this started." On the thermal displays, I could see why. The convergence points weren't staging areas for an attack. They were defensive lines. The deep entities were trying to reach something at extreme depth, and the burrow giants were forming perimeters to stop them. But at the Zagros breach, there was a gap, a hole in their defensive network. "Sir, I'm detecting thermal signatures at extreme depth, below 10,000 feet. We've never recorded readings from that far down before, and these aren't like anything we've seen. They're massive, easily 100 feet long, maybe larger, and they're moving upward." The temperature in the operations center seemed to drop. "How many?" asked Kowalski. "At least 3 confirmed signatures, possibly more. Our equipment wasn't designed to penetrate that deep. But sir, whatever these things are, the deep entities aren't trying to reach the surface. They're trying to stop these deeper signatures from rising, and the burrow giants are trying to help them." I stared at the thermal data, my mind struggling to process what we were seeing. The hierarchy we'd discovered wasn't a threat, it was a containment system. The burrow giants at 1,000 feet positioned beneath cities, the deep entities at 2,000 to 5,000 feet responding to breaches, and something else at 10,000 feet and below, something so dangerous that beings 30 feet tall are trying to prevent its ascent. "We've had it backwards," I said out loud. "The protocols weren't to protect us from the giants, they were to help the giants protect us from what's deeper. Every rule, every restriction was designed to maintain the containment system, and we just destroyed it." Kowalski's face was ashen. "The nuclear weapons, in 1945, that's when the garrison pattern started."
"Because we cracked the containment," I finished. "Nuclear detonations sent shockwaves through the earth. We didn't wake the burrow giants. We damaged the seals, keeping something else contained. The giants repositioned beneath our cities because that's where the weaknesses in the containment were, where the deepest things were most likely to emerge." Another acoustic message came through, more urgent this time. "Seal, now, time, short." "General," Kowalski said into the phone, "we need engineering teams at the Zagros breach immediately. The giants are requesting we help seal it. If we don't, something worse than the deep entities is going to emerge." "What kind of something?" General Harrison demanded. I pulled up the thermal profile of the signatures at extreme depth. Sir, based on size estimates, thermal output, and movement patterns, we're looking at entities potentially 100 to 150 feet in length. And unlike the giants and deep entities, these signatures show thermal readings of 85 degrees Fahrenheit. They're cold-blooded, reptilian maybe, or something else entirely. The Russian general interrupted on the shared channel. We have historical records, old Soviet geological surveys from the 1960s. Deep drilling operations in Siberia detected cavern systems at 40,000 feet. The drilling teams reported acoustic phenomena, sounds like breathing. The project was classified and abandoned. The Kola super deep borehole, the Chinese general added. We have similar records, Chinese deep drilling projects in the 1970s, all abandoned after encountering unexplained acoustic phenomena and temperature anomalies. The official story was technical limitations. The classified truth was that we heard something respond when we drilled too deep. Every nation had encountered them. Every nation had learned to stop digging, and the burrow giants had been maintaining the natural seals for millennia, long before humans had technology to pierce them. Engineering teams are mobilizing, General Harrison said. But what are we sealing? What specifications? The acoustic message changed. This time it included data. Seismic patterns, compression ratios, material densities. The burrow giants were sending us engineering specifications for how to seal a breach in the containment system. They're teaching us, Morrison said in awe. They're showing us how to do it. I translated the acoustic data into readable formats. We need to create a pressure seal using materials that can withstand extreme heat and seismic stress. The giants are recommending a combination of concrete, steel, and something else, a mineral they're identifying through its seismic signature. Our geological database identified the mineral, perovskite, a crystal structure that exists naturally at depths beyond 400 miles, under pressures that would crush normal rock. They want us to synthesize perovskite under extreme pressure and use it as the primary sealant. It's the only material that can withstand the forces from below. Can we even do that? Kowalski asked. The Russians can, General Volkov said. We have facilities for synthetic diamond production using extreme pressure. The process is similar, but transporting the material to Iran and constructing the seal will take days. The thermal readings from 10,000 feet showed the massive signatures accelerating their ascent. We don't have days, I said. Another acoustic message. This one felt different, not urgent, sad. Hold. We hold. You seal. They're going to contain it themselves, Kowalski whispered. The giants and the deep entities together. They're going to stop whatever's rising long enough for us to seal the breach. On the thermal displays, I watched as burrow giant signatures from across the Middle East converged on the Zagros breach. Not 15 or 20, hundreds. They were abandoning their garrison positions beneath cities, leaving populations undefended, gathering every available entity to create a living barrier at the breach point. And the deep entities, the ones we'd been fighting just hours ago, were joining them. Thermal signatures showed them working together, descending back into the collapsed tunnel system, positioning themselves in layers, giants at the top, deep entities below them, creating a wall of living flesh against whatever was rising from the depths. Casualties will be catastrophic, Morrison said quietly. They're putting themselves between us and something that could kill them all. They've been doing it for millennia, Kowalski replied. I pulled up historical seismic data, looking for patterns. Major earthquakes throughout history. The Lisbon earthquake of 1755, San Francisco 1906, Tokyo 1923.
Every major seismic event in recorded history corresponded with unusual acoustic phenomena recorded by sensitive instruments. The earthquakes, I said, they weren't natural. They were containment breaches, the things from the deep places trying to break through, and the burrow giants responding, fighting them back, causing seismic disturbances in the process. Every natural disaster in human history, Morrison added, pulling up his own data. Every tsunami, every volcanic eruption in populated areas. Look at the thermal data we have from historical events. There are always giant signatures present before the disaster, not causing it, responding to it, trying to minimize the damage.
We'd been living above an ancient war, a conflict that predated human civilization, fought by beings we'd only recently developed the technology to detect. The burrow giants weren't monsters, they were guards, sentinels maintaining a containment system that kept humanity safe from things that lived in the deepest places of the earth. And we'd broken their defenses. Engineering teams, ETA to Zagros. General Harrison's voice was tight. 12 hours for initial arrival, 48 hours for full containment construction. The giants are asking for 48 hours, Kowalski said. They're going to hold that breach for 2 days while we build a seal. On the thermal displays, the massive signatures from 10,000 feet reached the defensive line. The temperature reading spiked as the entities made contact. Heat from friction, from conflict, from beings fighting in spaces too deep for human equipment to properly image. But we could see the giant signatures, watching them wink out one by one as they died. 15-foot beings and 30-foot beings working together, dying together to buy us 48 hours. All units, General Harrison said, his voice carrying to every military force monitoring the crisis. The giants are holding the line. Our job is to give them a line worth holding. Engineering teams proceed to Zagros immediately. All available resources are authorized. Air support remains on station. If anything emerges from that breach, we hit it with everything we have. The acoustic messages continued. Updates on containment status, requests for medical supplies we couldn't provide, confirmation of their own casualties, and underneath it all, a repeated message that transcended language barriers. Protect, humans, always protect. I sat at my workstation, tears streaming down my face, watching thermal signatures die by the dozen. Beings we'd feared were sacrificing themselves to protect us, had always been protecting us, would continue to protect us until the last one fell. Captain Chen, Kowalski said softly, document everything, every thermal reading, every acoustic message, every casualty count. This is the truth. This is what they've been doing in the darkness, and when this is over, people need to know. The protocols were written to protect their secret, to maintain the silence that let them work without human interference. But if they're willing to die for us in numbers like this, the least we can do is remember, is honor what they've sacrificed. The Damascus Protocol was never about fighting the burrow giants. It was about helping them, working with them, respecting the system they'd maintained for millions of years. And now, watching them die to hold a breach we'd caused, I understood the terrible truth of our situation. We weren't the dominant species on this planet. We'd never been. We were just the species that lived on the surface, protected by guardians we'd never known existed, protected by beings who asked nothing in return except that we follow simple rules. Rules we'd written in their blood after they'd taught us through tragedy and loss what happened when we disturbed the containment. The thermal signatures from 10,000 feet were still rising, and the giants were still dying. But the seal was coming. Hope existed.
If they could hold for 48 hours, if we could synthesize enough perovskite, if the engineering teams could work fast enough. If. And in the deep places, beneath even the massive signatures we were tracking, our equipment detected something else. Something at depths our technology couldn't measure. Something that registered as nothing but absence, a void where thermal readings simply stopped. Something waiting. Something the burrow giants knew about, something they'd been preparing for since before human history began. The real threat, the deepest secret, and we'd just rung the dinner bell. Hour 36 of the containment effort, and the casualties were staggering. I'd stopped counting individual giant signatures after the number passed 400. The thermal displays showed a battlefield at depths human eyes would never see. Beings fighting and dying in darkness absolute, in pressures that would crush submarines, in temperatures that fluctuated between freezing and boiling. The engineering teams had arrived at the Zagros site. Russian specialists with synthetic perovskite, Chinese construction crews with drilling equipment designed for extreme conditions, American military engineers coordinating the effort, Iranian forces maintaining a security perimeter that had expanded to 20 kilometers. And beneath them all, the burrow giants held the line. "Captain Chen," Morrison called out, "I'm detecting unusual acoustic patterns from the breach. The giants are changing their message." I pulled up the signal analysis. The structured vibrations had shifted. Not desperate, not urgent, resolved. Seal, now, cannot hold much longer. "They're failing," I said quietly. "The defensive line is collapsing." Kowalski studied the thermal data. The number of active signatures at the breach had dropped by 70%. What remained were clustered in a tight formation, compressed by pressure from below. The massive 100-foot signatures from extreme depth were pushing through. "Engineering team, status!" the major demanded into his headset. The response came from a Russian engineer, his accent thick with exhaustion. "Perovskite matrix is in place. We are beginning concrete pour now, but process requires 12 hours to achieve structural integrity. Compression seals need time to cure under pressure. You have 6 hours, maybe less. The containment force is being overwhelmed." 6 hours is impossible. The materials will not bond properly. The seal will fail under stress from below. I watched the thermal displays as another cluster of giant signatures winked out. Gone, dead, buying us minutes with their lives. "Then make it work anyway," Kowalski said, his voice hard. "Because if that seal fails, what comes through will make the deep entities look like a minor threat."
On the shared command channel, General Harrison was coordinating a different kind of response. "All units, prepare for tactical nuclear option. If the seal cannot be completed before containment fails, we will collapse the entire mountain range. Authorization codes are being transmitted now." Nuclear weapons. The same technology that had cracked the containment in 1945, now being prepared to create a new seal through sheer destructive force. "Sir," I said, "nuclear detonations will kill any remaining giants at the breach." "I know, Captain." The general's voice was heavy. "But they know too. Listen." Another acoustic message came through. This one felt different, final. "Use, fire, seal, depth, remember, us." "They're authorizing it," Morrison whispered. "They're telling us to use nuclear weapons even though it means their death." The operations center went silent. Every analyst, every officer, every liaison from every nation understood what we were being asked to do. The beings who had protected humanity for millennia were giving us permission to kill them if it meant sealing the breach.
"Engineering team," General Harrison said, "you have until hour 42. After that, we detonate. Make every second count." The Russian engineer's response was simply, "Understood." I couldn't watch the thermal displays anymore. Couldn't watch signatures disappear, knowing that each one represented a being who had chosen to die for a species that hadn't even known they existed until 3 days ago. Instead, I pulled up historical data, looking for context, looking for hope, looking for evidence that the burrow giants had survived catastrophic breaches before. What I found was worse than I had feared. "Major Kowalski," I said, "I found references to previous containment failures. Geological records show 3 major events in the past 10,000 years where deep seismic activity suggests massive breach events." "When?" "Approximately 9600 BCE, 3100 BCE, and 535 CE. I pulled up the historical correlations. "Sir, those dates correspond with major extinction events in human populations. The Younger Dryas impact event, the collapse of early Bronze Age civilizations, the late Antique Little Ice Age." "You're saying containment failures caused those disasters?" "I'm saying something emerged during those periods that caused catastrophic climate changes, population collapses, and the end of entire civilizations. And each time it took the burrow giants centuries to restore containment. The historical record shows massive seismic activity continuing for 200 to 300 years after each event." Morrison pulled up climate data. "The temperature anomalies during those periods, sudden global cooling, crop failures, famine. We always attributed it to volcanic activity or meteor impacts. But what if it was something else? Something that emerged from below and affected the entire planet's climate?" "How did they reseal the containment?" Kowalski asked. I showed him the seismic records. Massive earthquakes, hundreds of them, over centuries. The giants collapsed tunnel systems, created new geological formations, literally reshaped the Earth's crust to re-establish the seals. The cost in giant lives must have been devastating. "And human lives?" Kowalski asked. "Estimates suggest 60 to 70% population reduction during each event." The weight of that knowledge settled over the operations center. We weren't just fighting to seal one breach. We were fighting to prevent the 4th major extinction event in human history. "Hour 40, an analyst called out. 2 hours until nuclear option." On the thermal displays, the defensive line at the Zagros breach was down to maybe 50 signatures. 50 giants out of the hundreds who had gathered to hold the line. And the massive signatures from depth were still pushing upward. "Engineering team, status." "Concrete is curing. Compression seals are beginning to bond, but stress tests show only 60% integrity. The seal will not hold against sustained pressure from below." "Make it 70%, General Harrison ordered. "Sir, the materials are all we have. Make it work." Another acoustic message, weaker this time, transmitted through failing bodies. "Hold, longer, finish, seal." "They're asking for more time," I translated. "They're promising to hold as long as we need." But the thermal data showed the truth. The remaining giants weren't just fighting against the deep entities, they were being crushed by them, compressed between the massive signatures from below and the tunnel ceiling above, using their own bodies as living barriers. "Sir," Morrison said, his voice breaking, "they're not fighting anymore. They're just blocking the passage, physically obstructing it with their bodies." On screen, I could see it in the thermal readings. Giant signatures pressed together so tightly they showed as a single mass, a wall of flesh and bone dying slowly under impossible pressure, buying us minutes. Kowalski stood. "General Harrison, request permission to address all engineering personnel at the breach site." "Granted." The Major activated the open channel that connected every person working at the Zagros location. Russian engineers, Chinese construction teams, American military personnel, Iranian support staff. This is Major David Kowalski, Umbra Deep Command. I know you're exhausted. I know the timeline seems impossible, but I need you to understand what's happening beneath your feet right now. He pulled up thermal imaging and transmitted it to their displays.
These signatures you're seeing, each one represents a being approximately 15 feet tall, intelligent, sentient, and currently being crushed to death, holding back something that would kill millions if it reached the surface. They've been protecting humanity for longer than our species has had written language. And right now, they're dying to give you time to finish your work. The channel was silent, except for the sounds of construction equipment. They're not asking us to save them. They're asking us to finish the seal so their sacrifice means something. So the containment they've maintained for millions of years doesn't fail because we accidentally broke it. Every minute you save, every percentage point of seal integrity you can achieve honors what they're doing down there in the darkness. His voice hardened. So I'm not asking you to do the impossible. I'm telling you that beings far more ancient than us are doing the impossible right now. The least we can do is match their effort. General Harrison, recommend we delay nuclear option to hour 44. Give the teams every possible minute. Agreed, the general said immediately. All teams, you have until hour 44. Make it count. The acoustic messages had stopped. Either the giants were too weak to transmit, or there was no one left to send them. The thermal display showed perhaps 30 signatures remaining at the breach, fading, cooling, dying. But the seal construction continued. Human beings working with desperate intensity, racing against time to complete a barrier that would honor the sacrifice happening in the depths below. Hour 43, someone called out. Seal integrity at 68%. It's holding. Pressure tests show structural stability. Hour 44. 73%. It's holding. Pressure tests show structural stability. The thermal display showed 15 giant signatures remaining, then 12, then 8. Seal is complete, the Russian engineer reported. Final integrity reading 76%. It should hold. We pray it holds. All personnel evacuate the breach site. Clear to minimum safe distance for nuclear option. If that seal fails, we detonate in 30 minutes. The engineering teams withdrew. The military perimeter pulled back. And in the darkness below, the last burrow giant signatures held their position, maintaining pressure from below, using their final moments to help the concrete cure, to give the barrier every possible chance of success. They're still there, Morrison whispered, still holding it. We watched as the signatures faded one by one. 5, 3, 1. The last thermal reading showed a giant pressed against the seal itself, body temperature dropping, dying, and then, finally, gone. Seal integrity holding, the engineer reported. Pressure from below is contained. The barrier is functioning. The nuclear option was cancelled. The breach was sealed. And humanity survived because beings we'd feared had died in numbers we'd never fully count, fighting an enemy we'd never fully understand, maintaining a system we'd nearly destroyed through ignorance. The operations center remained silent for a long time. What do you say after watching 800 thermal signatures sacrifice themselves? What words adequately honor that kind of sacrifice? Finally,
General Harrison spoke. Begin global assessment. How many giant signatures remain worldwide? I ran the analysis, dreading the answer. Before the breach, we'd estimated approximately 3,000 to 5,000 burrow giants maintaining the containment system worldwide. Sir, current count shows 1,847 active signatures remaining globally. We lost approximately 65% of the total population in 48 hours. The garrison positions beneath major cities were devastated. Tokyo had lost all but 3 of its defensive giants. Moscow was down to 12. New York City had 5 remaining. Every population center showed catastrophic casualties among its protectors. And the deep entity count? Unknown, sir. They returned to depth after the seal was completed, but thermal readings suggest significant casualties among them as well. We'd won. The containment was restored. Humanity was safe. But the cost had been devastating to the beings who had made that safety possible. All commands, General Harrison said. Effective immediately, the protocols are revised. No deep drilling operations without international oversight. No tunnel construction below 500 feet without giant signature approval. No exceptions. We will never, ever risk another breach like this. Every national command confirmed. Russia, China, Europe, Iran. Nations that had been enemies hours ago, now unified in protecting the beings who protected us. And one more thing, the general added. Captain Chen's recommendation is approved. We document this. We remember this. Every analyst, every officer, every person who witnessed what happened here will ensure the truth survives. The burrow giants are not threats. They are guardians, and we will honor their sacrifice. I looked at the thermal displays showing the depleted signatures worldwide. Beings trying to maintain a containment system with barely a third of their original numbers. Beings who would continue protecting us despite what we'd cost them. Sir, I said quietly, what happens if there's another breach? We don't have enough giants left to contain it. Major Kowalski met my eyes. Then we hope we've learned enough to help them, to fight alongside them instead of in ignorance of them. Because, Captain Chen, the protocols aren't just rules anymore. They're a covenant between species, between surface and depth, between humanity and the beings who have kept us safe since before we knew safety was needed. The thermal displays showed giants returning to their garrison positions, fewer now, spread thinner, maintaining watch over cities that slept peacefully, unaware of what had been sacrificed for their continued existence, unaware that beneath their feet, in the darkness they'd never see, guardians stood watch against things they'd never imagine. And that was how it had to remain. For now. That was 6 months ago. I am no longer stationed at the Joint Thermal Analysis Center. After the Zagros incident, I was promoted to Director of Giant Human Relations, a position that officially doesn't exist in any organizational chart. My job is to monitor the remaining giant signatures, coordinate international response protocols, and ensure that what happened in Iran never happens again. But tonight, I am breaking every classification protocol I've ever sworn to uphold, because the situation has changed and people need to know. The thermal monitoring network I watch every day shows 1,847 giant signatures maintaining their positions worldwide. They've adapted their defensive patterns, spread themselves thinner to cover the gaps left by their fallen. They continue their endless vigil in the darkness, protecting a species that didn't even know they existed until we nearly destroyed them. But the deep signatures, the things at 10,000 feet and beyond, haven't stopped moving. Since the Zagros breach was sealed, we've detected 17 separate instances of massive thermal signatures attempting to rise from extreme depths. Each time, the remaining giants have responded. Each time, they've managed containment. But the attempts are becoming more frequent, more coordinated. 3 weeks ago, we detected something new. The void signatures, the thermal absences at unmeasurable depth, started showing pattern changes, movement that suggests intelligence, organization, as if whatever exists down there is learning from each failed attempt, adapting its strategy. Yesterday, we lost contact with giant signatures beneath Jakarta. All 14 thermal readings disappeared simultaneously, not fading like casualties, just gone, as if something had the ability to simply erase them from existence. Major Kowalski and I spent 18 hours analyzing the data. The conclusion was unavoidable. Something is hunting the giants now, not trying to break through the containment, actively targeting the beings who maintain it. If the giant population drops below critical threshold, the entire containment system could fail, not from a single breach, but from systematic collapse across multiple locations simultaneously. The nightmare scenario we've spent 6 months preparing for. And there's nothing I can do to stop it from within the system. The official protocols require silence, maintain the secret, keep the civilian population unaware. But I've watched too many thermal signatures disappear. I've translated too many acoustic messages from beings begging us to understand what's at stake. The last message we received 3 days ago came from the giant population beneath Beijing. It was different from anything we'd intercepted before. Not a tactical update or containment status. Something else. Tell them truth. Need help. All help. For the first time in millennia, the burrowed giants are asking humanity for help they can't provide in secret. They need us, not just our military forces, all of us. Every human being who can understand the threat and choose to respect the boundaries that keep us safe. But my superiors refused to declassify the information. Too much risk of panic, they said. Better to maintain the silence and handle threats as they emerge. But I disagreed, vocally. I was removed from active monitoring duty pending psychological evaluation. They think the stress of watching giant casualties has affected my judgment. Maybe it has. But I know what I saw in the thermal data. I know what's rising from the deep places. And I know that silence isn't protecting humanity anymore. It's isolating the only beings standing between us and extinction. So I'm breaking my oath, releasing classified information, committing what will certainly be considered treason by multiple nations. Because the alternative is watching the containment fail, while the only species who could have helped us never knew we needed help. If you're reading this, you now know the truth. Beneath your feet, in tunnel systems that span the globe, beings that predate human civilization are fighting a war to protect you. They're dying, they're losing, and they need you to understand why the rules exist. Don't dig too deep. Don't explore restricted caves during new moon periods. Don't ignore warning signs at abandoned mines. Don't assume that because you can't see the danger, it doesn't exist. Every protocol, every restriction, every no trespassing sign at a deep tunnel entrance exists for a reason. Not to hide government secrets, to maintain a containment system that kept humanity safe for thousands of years. The burrow giants have never asked anything of us except that we stay out of their way while they protect us. Now they're asking for something more. Awareness, understanding, cooperation from every person, not just every military force. I'm releasing thermal imagery with this account. Satellite data showing giant signatures beneath major cities. Acoustic recordings of their messages. Seismic data from containment attempts. Everything I can provide without revealing specific military capabilities. Some of you will dismiss this as conspiracy theory. Some of you will think I've lost my mind. But some of you will look at the evidence and understand. And maybe, just maybe, enough people will understand that we can establish new protocols, civilian protocols, rules that every person follows because they understand what's at stake.
The drilling company that caused the Zagros breach didn't know what they were doing. They were just trying to find oil, trying to do their jobs. If they'd known what was beneath that mountain, they never would have drilled there. How many other operations are happening right now? How many mining companies, geological surveys, geothermal projects, and private excavations are probing depths they shouldn't, ignorant of what they're risking? The giants can't protect us from our own ignorance. They can only respond to breaches after they happen. By then, it's too late. By then, people are already dead. Containment is already compromised, and the things from below are already rising. We need to stop the breaches before they happen, and we can't do that in secret. I know what happens next. They'll come for me. Classification breaches of this magnitude carry severe consequences. I'll likely spend the rest of my life in military detention if I'm lucky. If I'm not lucky, I might just have an unfortunate accident. But I've watched 800 thermal signatures sacrifice themselves to protect a species that didn't even know they existed. I've translated their messages, felt their desperation, understood their sacrifice. The least I can do is tell their story, make sure someone knows what they've done, what they're still doing, what they need from us. To the burrow giants, if somehow you can understand this message, I'm sorry we failed you. Sorry we broke the containment. Sorry we're still not doing enough to help. But I'm trying. And maybe others will try too. To anyone reading this, look at the evidence. Verify what you can, and then make a choice. Keep digging into places we don't understand or respect the boundaries that beings far wiser than us established millions of years ago. Because the next breach might not be containable. The giants are too few now, spread too thin. If something major emerges, if multiple locations fail simultaneously, there aren't enough of them left to hold the line. And what comes through when the containment fails will make the Zagros incident look like a minor incident. I'm uploading this to multiple secure servers, distributing it through channels that can't be easily shut down. By the time military intelligence finds it, it'll be too late to suppress. The truth is out there now. What you do with it is up to you.
My name is Captain Sarah Chen. This is my testimony, and I stand by every word. The thermal imagery Captain Chen referenced, it's real. The patterns she described, they exist in satellite data we're not supposed to see. The protocols, they're followed by every military force on Earth, even though they'll never officially acknowledge why. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever encountered restricted tunnel areas with warnings that seemed excessive? Ever wondered why certain cave systems are permanently sealed? Share your experiences. And if you know anyone who works in geological survey, deep mining, or underground construction, share this with them. They need to understand what's really beneath our feet. Because the burrow giants are still down there, still protecting us, still dying in darkness while we sleep peacefully above. The least we can do is remember and respect the boundaries they're giving everything to maintain. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and stay out of the deep places. Some doors were sealed for a reason.